Okay, so we should be recording, and now I'll go back to sharing my brands.
Who would have thought it could have been that easy to find?
Yeah, well, we're going now.
Okay, first off, I just want to thank Sandy for being the gatekeeper and our know-it-all on the Adobe Connect, because I don't know how we would get through this otherwise. Obviously, I'm still having issues with it. What I've done for today's session is I've set up a very simple cow herd supplementation that will just help everybody practice on basic navigation. Most everybody probably can't do this while we're going through it, but that's hopefully why I put the outline together, so you can practice this later and ask us questions as we go. When we start brands, you'll open it and you're going to have to turn off the macros. If you're using a newer version of Excel, this is pretty easy. Typically right below all of your columns, navigation columns at the top, there'll be a button that will ask you this, and you'll just have to click it a couple things and it'll happen. If you're using an older version of Excel, you're going to have to go into security and turn on macros from that standpoint. Macros are what drive this program, and if they're not on, you're going to have a lot of crazy things going on and it's not going to work properly. But we'll open brands, turn on the macros, and typically when I'm working on a ration for a producer, the first thing I'll do is go to the Settings tab, and Sandy's already there, and from there I will, if I'm working with a new producer, I'll click on the new producer button that Sandy's showing you there and enter that new producer's name. You can put their phone number, whatever info you want to have there, and then click Save. Now, one quirky thing about this program, it's based in Excel, so sometimes you have to click out of the box you're working in, and then you can click on Save or whatever command you're trying to perform. So if it's not listening to you, remember, just click away from it and then go to Save. Typically the save function takes a while. I think it probably is dependent on how much power your computer has. Those of y'all that are fairly new to the program, while we're waiting for it to save, I think it's done saving now. Down below that are your weather data tables. As Dale mentioned last time, you can adjust any of this. You have mature cow size, a lot of things that are defaults in the system, but they're defaults that you can adjust to. I'm not going to go into those today. If you have some more questions about those, feel free to contact any of us and we can discuss them. From here, we're going to click on the feeds library, and hopefully when that producer comes in, they've got an idea of what they're going to feed or have an idea of what options they have. It's even better if they have analysis of what they have on hand already, because it makes our job a lot easier and more accurate. But we'll go to the feeds library by clicking on the feeds tab at the bottom. From there, we will need to, well, I wanted to make a few comments here. Carl Garden has found a few of the, I will call my glitches that I made when we put together this feeds library. Dale and I had a very short, limited amount of time to get this done. I made a few screw-ups. There's some energy values that are in kilograms rather than pounds. We're in the process of redoing the feeds library. I know a lot of you don't like how it's set up with the roughages, hays, pasture, and we're going to streamline a lot of that and redo this and hopefully figure out a way that it'll be real easy for you to update yours. Now that I've said that, the feeds that I've chose for today's example, we're going to need to go in and make sure that we've cleared out, if that or Sandy may have already entered them, I don't know, the feeds tab, and you can go to the very top and hit clear, and then we'll need to go in and put a number in by the feeds that producer has brought to you that day. And I chose for this just native range.
What number is native range? There's native pasture, June, and winter. I wasn't sure what you intended.
I think the winter native range is what I was intending. The second would just be an alfalfa hay. I picked the 15% crude protein. Then I also wanted to put a commercial cube in here. We've had some requests for this, so I've fabricated a commercial cube nutrient composition listing that's down below that we're going to go ahead and enter as part of this example. But we'll also need to select the dried distiller grains, rolled corn, and soybean meal. From there, when we manually enter the cubes, you can put them wherever you want. I would probably put them in the protein supplement category. From there, we'll need to be sure to enter most of this information. Sometimes we get into a situation where we don't have the DIP percentage or the solubility of the crude protein and some of the other values. I would enter everything that you can, and sometimes if you find something there's something you need, you can always pick a similar product and just carbon copy it, and it'll be close enough. Hopefully as we perfect this feeds library and move forward, we'll have to do less and less of this. But for today's example, this is how you can enter a feedstuff or hay that a producer has provided to you. But you'll go into, I'm not sure where you're at, Sandy.
I have added my cubes earlier, and even though I cleared my feedstuffs, they stayed there. The only thing you didn't indicate is the dry matter on those. I put 90%.
Yes, I forgot to put that on there. That will be very important in once we get to the balancing portion of this. Thank you, Sandy. So Sandy's got it already entered. If you're trying to do this along with us as we go on, please tell us to stop. If not, we're going to move on. As Sandy just did, I think she did, unless she had a problem. You need to go, since we added something manually, you need to go up and click Save, and that should save whatever custom feed stuff you put in there into the feed library. Now, the one thing you can do, and I really didn't want to open this today, but I'll mention it. Well, let's go ahead and skip that today. We'll talk about making your own producer-specific library later. From here, to go to the cow module, you have to click on the top button, the one Sandy's hovering over right now. If you click on the one on the bottom that says cows, it will not export the feeds into that module. Pretty important part here. If you don't do that, you're going to get there and go, well, where are all the feeds I just entered? And you'll have to do it all over again. Okay, now Sandy's moved on to the cow module. Here we're going to need to enter the parameters of our current of the cow herd and the current conditions. Dates I chose were February 1st through March 15th. Basically what I was looking at here, we've got a hypothetical producer who's wanting to feed his cows from now till calving. They're medium size, British high milk, body condition 5. That's where I want them, so we're going to leave them there. They're all mature cows. They're in their third trimester, obviously. When we get up to conditions, or calf birth weights, I typically use moderate. If you go back to that settings page and look at those weights, I think this is 60 to 95 maybe. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but moderate's pretty safe there, I think. Wind exposure, depending on if you've adjusted the wind values on the settings page, I just use normal for the most part. Hair condition, I typically almost always use dry to balance a ration. If I'm going to adjust for wet conditions, I typically go into the maintenance adjustment down below from where Sandy is. Hair, winter coat, normal temperatures. Once again, I'll adjust for temperature and rain with this maintenance adjustment here. For cow group size moving down, I typically, you can balance for whatever you want. This number here is going to be used when you start printing out batch sheets and that type of information. It's not going to affect your balance number. Where you're going to affect your balance number is right above or in the ration composition table. There's a space that says balance for number of head. I almost always balance, well, I do balance for one head. It keeps things a lot simpler there. I don't see any questions at this point, so I'm going to go to full screen so I can see the ration composition numbers better. Typically, when I start balancing a ration for cows like this one, I'm going to look at their base forage and try to determine how much of that base forage they can eat. And if we look at native winter range, Big Blue Stem, Flint Hills, Kansas, we're looking somewhere in that, probably 1.5 to maybe a hair higher on, depending on how late in the winter it is, of their body weight. And if Sandy will hover over where I'm talking about, that'll show up. Down below ration evaluation, there's a projected performance number that says dry matter divided by body weight. A little lower, Sandy. There. That number there. And basically, I'm just starting out here to figure out how much of that they can eat, and I'm establishing a starting point for balancing a ration. We're at 100% of their consumption at 30 pounds of that range. That's roughly 1.7 of their dry matter percentage of their body weight. So going from there, we've already chose our feedstuffs, and this is what the producers told us they have as options. And what I have done from there is basically taken this and made 5 different scenarios that we could do and still probably meet their requirements. Now, one thing I didn't do in this is I didn't put price values in the feeds library, and it really, if they're trying to go for least cost or best cost, you'll need to do that as accurate as possible, and then start looking at the cost per feed per head per day, which is going to be located in the projected performance area. I didn't give that to us today because I was trying to keep it simple and try to answer some other questions, and so we're just going to be balancing for performance on this. The second ration that I put together was feeding 8 pounds of the 20% cubes. And to be honest with you, where I got this number was KSU has a beef cow nutrition guide, and there's some dry cow and wet cow rations in there. And if you looked at that, you could probably take a pretty good guess, a rough estimate on how many cubes you're going to have to feed. And this is where I pulled that number from. Now, if we go over here, this isn't working exactly the way mine did. Estimated dry matter intake is actually going to be what for mature cows? 33, if I'm reading it correctly.
Um,
Sandy?
for mature cow, I have 35.3.
And we're actually having an intake of 29.6.
Right.
So what we would have to do there is bump up our native range consumption until we get that number closer.
And do you want to...
I would probably leave the cubes constant.
So I can take this up till I get my consumption
Close to 100%.
100%. And mature cow. So at about 37.5 of native range, I'm at 100% consumption for the mature cow.
With that consumption, we've bumped up dry matter intake to 2.5%, which we think we're providing it, and that's probably pretty close to ballpark. Going with the program with what's there. If we look at the performance values under projected performance, our 30-day BCS change, we're actually going to gain 1/10 of a BCS, which isn't a whole lot, practically speaking. We don't want these cows to be subjected to any kind of deficit in their nutrition plane at this point in time in that last 60 days for sure. One thing Sandy just did I want to point out is if we're just looking at a group of mature cows, we can click on the printout summary bar down there, and you can get rid of the first calf or second calf cows in that group. That way you get the clutter out of the way. In this diet, if we're looking and worried or trying to hit a target crude protein or DIP requirement, something along those lines, just below or right above, actually, excuse me, a projected performance, those values will be shown. On the right hand side of the ration evaluation tab, we can also get a rough estimate of what that diet's providing, and we can cross-reference that back to the NRC or any of our sources for that. If you've got a table somewhere else, a lot of university publications cover that, and you can cross-reference that to make sure your ballpark also if you don't feel comfortable with the numbers you see. I'm going to go ahead and go back down. Let's go back and change the diet again. We don't like that. Feeding 8 pounds of cubes per head per day is going to be awfully expensive to 100 cows, so let's try something different.
Carl, before we do that, let's address Justin's question about the 5% waste on native range.
Thank you, Justin, and that's something that's probably skewing our intake a little bit there. We really don't need any kind of wastage number on a standing forage. And Dale also said last week, what the right number is, it's really what you feel comfortable with, especially when we're feeding, you throw cubes out, unless the weather is really, really nasty, we're probably not going to have a 5% wastage on cubes either. At least not the cows I feed at our place at home. Actually, amazingly, I don't think there's any wastage, but to be safe, probably a 1 or 2% there. Dale also made the comment, if you're feeding in bunks, you're probably not going to have, with mature cows at this point in time, you're probably not going to have a lot of wastage either. If anybody's fed cows on the Flint Hills this time of year, typically they're slicked. So that is going to adjust these numbers a little bit. Okay. To adjust the ration, we didn't like the 20% cubes. That was just going to be too expensive, or for whatever reason he couldn't handle that many. Let's go ahead and try 4 pounds of distiller grains. Let's see where we're at. We're probably a little off still on dry matter intake, so we'll have to adjust that. I think, Sandy, I came up with 40 when I worked through it on my program.
Probably have slightly different weather settings in there, Carl.
You're probably you're right. You're exactly right. But ballpark, you know. And so basically what I'm trying to show you here is what you can do. Now, one thing I didn't do with it is I probably should have thrown a value out there, because I guess I've done it enough. I've got a pretty good idea. Plus, working with the rule of thumb that I'm trying to accomplish here, you know, to change things up a little bit, why don't we go up, Sandy, and change the maintenance value, or the BCS desired? So in other words, we're in a situation here where we need to add some body condition score. I would say no more than probably a half. We've got 45 days to get there, which is going to be really pushing it. But let's just, for example here, I've not worked through this. Let's go back down and see where we're at there. Okay, we're right at 100% on consumption. We're still a little shy on protein. One thing, DDG's probably become a little bit arguable, and Justin can chime in here. We've had this discussion quite a few times. I would guess these cattle are going to do a hair better on the distiller grains due to the UIP in here that's not really showing up, that's going to be recycled. There are no equations that account for this at this point in time. So I'm guessing they're going to do a little bit better.
And what I've done is take you over to the right of that balancing screen, and you can look at this. Here's the percent of crude protein that's DIP.
Okay. So go back. Could you go back to the balance screen, Sandy? And really what I was trying to show you there is what's going to affect. Obviously, you're going to have to put some more gain, increase those values either in the DDGs of your supplement. Sorry, yeah, I've lost track of where I was at. To increase the compensation to gain that body condition score. Another ration I built, which is a pretty standard supplement, at least from what we used on campus when I was there. It all depends on availability, but it's essentially trying to accomplish the same thing protein-wise, right at 30% or so, somewhere in that range, and that's combining corn and soybean meal. Y'all know as well as I do, most of these producers are scrambling and have been scrambling over the past year to find the cheapest source of protein they could find, and there's really been no single silver bullet to this. This is one option we've used a little bit down here. I typically mix a supplement that's approximately 3 parts corn, 1 part soybean meal. So 3 pounds of soybean meal, 3 pounds of corn and 1 pound of soybean meal. Somewhere in that range. And it may have to be adjusted a little bit for your parameters, Sandy. And when I ran it, it had 36 pounds of native. And I was running this on a maintenance cow, not a cow that we needed to add weight to.
you want to leave or add and wait, or you want to go back to maintenance?
We can leave it. It'll be fine. It's not gonna. The numbers I came up with were just based on a maintenance count. So, and I can't see consumption. We're at 100%.
But our protein is still 66%, and
We're still at 66. Okay, bump. I had just bumped soybean meal up a little bit. It probably won't take very much.
now that's equal parts soybean and corn. And I can actually back my corn down a little bit because I still have more energy than I need. But I can up my
How many pounds are you at, Sandy, on the soybean meal?
right now I'm at 3 pounds of soybean meal, 2 pounds of corn, and I'm 37 of hay. Justin?
Okay, Justin, okay. Okay.
Alright, so maybe taking those down to 0, or we'll put them really minimal.
Okay. Keith, to answer Keith's question, when you start this program and start entering stuff, there is really no default ration in here, or example ration. Everything we've done was entered before today, or it'd be from something you did prior. Yes, I would recommend, as a starting point, going back to publication examples or just stuff you've done before, or you can call any of us and we can get you started on a ballpark and you can hone it in from there. I hope that answers your question, but that's typically what I normally do. Okay, Sandy, did you get Justin's message?
Yeah, I've taken my waste down to a
On the-
0.5%. I didn't take it out totally.
Okay.
And that
Okay.
worked really good for Justin to put the raise his hand deal, because then I saw that at the bottom of my screen too. So those of you that have questions, we're not speaking right away. That button down to the lower left, raise your hand. That'll make Keith ask a question.
No, that's fine, Keith. This is what we're doing this for. We're all learning this program too, and at the same time teaching you, which works good for us because it makes us think about things that we may just blow over. Unfortunately, there's not really anything default built into this program. And I guess we could argue if there's enough, just the difference between Sandy and I, from a weather standpoint, climate standpoint, it'd be tough to really do anything pretty basic. But going back to those publications is a good way to start. I even do it if I'm not familiar with some of the products I'm using.
Okay, Carl, I'm at 42 pounds of native and 2.5 pounds of soybean meal. That has me 99% on consumption, 161%
Okay.
net energy, 101% protein, and my cow gain is just a little bit over the desired 1.52 versus the desired 1.48.
Okay. Typically, I'm not sure if Justin or Larry, anybody's ever used soybean meal. I typically always have it with a carrier with some corn, just a little bit at least, to help carry it. And actually, sometimes there are some issues with palatability with it. I don't know if we can completely take it out. And then you got a question, I guess, realistically, when we start talking 42 pounds of native winter range, I'm starting to wonder, I'm not saying it's not possible, I guess. I'm starting to wonder if we're not probably supplementing her efficiently enough, I guess is what I'm questioning on that. I'm actually reading Justin's question or comment right now. Okay. The last ration that I put together, let's just say, okay, now we don't like soybean meal because of it's too hard to meet their requirements. The next option would be go back to alfalfa hay. And this is going to be a little tougher with a cow that's needing to gain weight, but I formulated one that would have 8 pounds of alfalfa, and I started at the base of that. I always go back to that original base that I figured out is how much dry matter of my base forage can they consume, and balance off of that, and I came up with 30 and 8. 30 pounds of native and 8 pounds of alfalfa. Probably on the alfalfa wastage, 5% probably, I don't know, it's arguably close, I don't know. Someone else may chime in there. There's typically, when they flake out alfalfa, there's typically some wastage there still. Alright, Sandy, I can't, let me go full screen. So we're overfeeding dry matter, our intake's higher. Are you adjusted? Okay. And that you switched that back to maintenance, right, Sandy?
Yes, I did change it back to maintenance.
It gets pretty tough if you're trying to put weight on a cow to just use alfalfa. Depending on, and from my experiences, I've not been able to accomplish it very efficiently. But that's, Sandy's got it balanced right there. You have, what, 8 pounds of alfalfa, 32.7?
Yes.
Okay.
Now that does show us
And go ahead.
gain in 0.43 pounds a day, so we are putting a little weight on.
Yep. 45 day, what's that, 20 pounds, which would be closer to 20% of a body condition score. Oh, but that's 30 days. That's right. Okay, so those were the 5 different combinations that I came up with. You know, the combinations are endless when we start looking at it. The more you do, or the more you've done, the more you realize this. The goal, I think, are some pointers from my standpoint, like on the distiller grains. You know, there's some rule of thumbs that most of us use, at least in Kansas. Nebraska probably goes a little bit higher than that, but you know, that goes back to just following the rules of feeding distiller grains. Typically, I don't feed much over 7 to 8 pounds to cows. If you know what the fat content and sulfur content of it is, you can go higher. You know, maybe say 10 pounds if need be, if it's readily available. Cubes, there's been some interest. Y'all know as well as I do that a lot of our producers use some kind of cube or cake just because it's convenient. There were my numbers were fabricated. Those are not exact numbers from any kind of analysis. I would suggest trying to get something from the feed mill that the producer's getting them if you're going to use those to have a better idea. Now, we've created this ration. We're happy with the alfalfa and native winter range. Alfalfa doesn't play real well into this, but let's just say the producer called you, he told you all the numbers, he's going to come by and pick up some stuff. So we need to save this particular ration. Okay. Sandy, the one thing I didn't catch, did Dale talk about the formulate button?
I don't remember if he suggested to just stay away from it for now, or if that was some other discussion, but...
I think in the interaction I've had and the experience I have with that button, I wish they would just remove it for us. I have not had any luck using that button. Actually, I've had more bad situations happen with it not running and deleting everything I put in. And my recommendation at this point in time, as Sandy said, I agree with her 100%, stay away from that button as much as possible for now. That is designed to do a least cost with the ingredients that you provide. There's a lot of things that have to happen right for it to work, and at this point in time I just don't feel comfortable recommending it. Now, if Sandy will roll down, I don't know if Dale went through the whole printing of a ration, but it's pretty easy to do. You can just click on ration summary there. We get a nice printout sheet here, and you can just click on print and print it off. One thing I typically do is I convert it to a PDF. I don't know if everybody has that ability. I think it stores better. And it's easier to ship via email. This works out pretty nice. One other thing you can do here, this ration the ration composition that we made here doesn't work well for this, obviously, but you can print out Bax mix sheets. So if you have something similar to the soybean meal and corn that we came up with earlier, the producer wants to know how much to mix on a batch of 2 tons. You can input that down here, like Sandy's doing. The reason it did that is probably because of the feedstuffs we have selected. Oh, that's the blend mix sheet. If we go, okay, if they're going to be included in the TMR, they cannot have the X or H as what Sandy's showing here. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If they have the X, they will show up there. Sitting on the Bax mix sheet on the left side is the one I've been using for this. I don't know if I haven't tried the one you're clicking on there. I also adjust the increment also, Sandy. The nice thing about that increment is if you have a producer that, if he wants to produce a batch that is a ton, or you can change that increment percentage and you can have it set up so you could mix 2 ton, 1 ton, 3 ton. It's all on what you set that increment percentage at. Okay. I guess we could go in and set that up. There we go. Do we have any questions at this point in time? We're doing pretty good on time. I saw, Chris, you made a comment about least cost button. I agree with you 100%. That's why I'm just not real comfortable with that at all. And maybe I'm not sure least cost is the best way to describe it. It's the biggest headache button is what I would call it at this point in time. A few other questions that have been arising that has to deal with using Bovatech or ionophores. The easy answer I have, I guess, or the quick answer is most of the Bovatech, Rumensin, any of those ionophores that are your producers or you yourself are going to be feeding are going to be mixed into some kind of carrier. Unless you have, and I'm stealing this from Dale, a micro machine and you're making your own micro mineral or your mineral packet, there's really no need to worry about the Bovatech line on the feed library. If you roll into the actual minerals, there's a grower mineral, cow mineral, any of those minerals at the bottom have a space for an ionophore to be put in there. And Sandy's cruising over there to show that. And once again, it's actually back to the left a little bit. Typically, if the producer is going to use a mineral that has that product already in there, we'll look at we can custom enter that mineral in here and put it into the feed and account for it that way. There's a couple of things that I don't recommend producers touching for the most part, and that's urea and any of the ionophores. I prefer they have a professional mix any of those into a ration for them. Sandy, anything that I'm missing?
I think the reproduction on these cows will be fine.
Hope so.
And I guess what
Justin? Okay, go ahead, Sandy.
You work through a problem and have questions. Just, keep your running list of questions and save those files and perhaps try and share those then and troubleshoot some of those things that way to bring up specific questions.
That is something I did want to mention. Justin and I are trying to figure out how to do it again. And I think it's possible to save a file and email that file to Dale, Sandy, Justin, myself, or Larry, or Chris, Reinhardt, anybody, and have them look at them and adjust it and then tweak it and send it back to you. That ability is supposed to be there. We have not perfected how to do it. So once we do that, we will share that in one of these sessions. It worked pretty handy in Balancer and Grower, and I know in our initial training that was brought up, but I have not been able to repeat it yet.
Okay,
so I'm learning also.
What's showing up on your screen right now is I went to my brands folder under this producer, and I've got two files there. One's a WOC file and one's a feed mill IAJ, and I assume we'd have to email those two files. And then what I've done with Tressie one time, and I think we had the same thing, was I created a file with her producer name and then saved those in there. And I think I got to it that way. So should you have that question right away, start by trying that, and it might work.
Any other questions? Everybody's been awfully quiet. Either they're not, we put them to sleep, or something along those lines. Tracy mentioned here, and Sandy already said it, they've gotten this to work. So you're emailing the whole producer folder is what you've done. Correct?
I think she mailed the files in that folder, and then I had to create.
Okay.
I needed to create that folder in mine, and I don't remember. I haven't sent it, so yeah, she just selected those files in the folder, and then I created that new folder with that same producer name.
Okay.
And we were able to do that all right. So, we just need to try these things and figure out what it is we do and don't know.
Sandy, do you still have it up? Brands up right now?
I can go back to it here.
I would like to go over one more thing if everybody, unless we need to cut out now. I didn't know what our time length was exactly.
We don't have limitations on the amount of time we can use the connection. It's just a matter of people's time. So.
Right. I'll make this pretty quick. I guess. Do we have anything up still, or would we have to start over?
I'm back in the same feed library that we were before.
Okay. If you'll go back to the Cal module, and you've got a producer that's up, and I want to show them. Basically, at the top up here, there's file utilities, and there's going to be a name, like Sandy has late gestation. Now, the one way I do it is if I'm building different rations, I'll put late gestation 1, 2, 3, 4 for every ration. I'd like, for example, that we built today, and then, okay, we've done this today, and then a week from now, the producer calls me and says, well, I want to tweak something. Well, I can go into brands, I go to the setting page, I go to that producer, and then I can, hopefully, if it all worked, I did everything I'm supposed to do properly, I'll go to the Cal module here, click on the file name, like Sandy put late gestation 2, I can click restore, and it'll bring that ration back to me. And I can adjust whatever we needed to adjust accordingly and go from there.
It's still restoring, but right now I have 4 pounds of corn, and now when I went back to late gestation 2, it brought me back to 8 pounds of alfalfa.
The big thing I've had to discipline myself on doing is making sure if I've done something that I may want to look at later, give it a name and click save on file utilities.
The difference between the save button by ration composition and the save by file utilities.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. I was sort of curious myself because I've done it always in file utilities. I've never used that save button down there.
Okay, Joe's got a question there.
Okay.
So Joe, that is getting several ingredients to, if there's several ingredients in the ration, trying to get everything at 100, is that your question?
Joe, has this happened on multiple occasions or on a particular instance that you were trying to get to work?
But part of that will be, Carl, is you won't get everything over in this column to all be 100 at the same time. We might be over on energy,
No.
meat, protein.
I think when we start looking at the cow module, it all comes down to, are we hitting our performance, projected performance that we want to hit? Are we close enough? I mean, it's always ballpark on the cow deal. When I'm not sure what Justin's going to do at the next training, when we start looking at the feed yard model, we're going to see a net energy and protein just like we are here, but it's going to show us what we're limiting in and what's limiting us on hitting our projection. Well, it's sort of the same, but it is a little different. And you're right, saying you'll never get that 100%. You just have to deem what's acceptable to you and something you'll get the performance that you feel comfortable with.
You know, and part of that, Joe, is going to relate to what is it that's over and what's it cost us to be over. Okay, calcium and phosphorus, we're over on the requirement. Not an issue. Our calcium to phosphorus ratio, 2.9 to 1. That's still within an acceptable range. We wouldn't want to be at 80% protein or 80% energy. If our consumption is way under 100%, again, that's going to deceive what's in there. So consumption, energy, and protein, I think you want to make sure that you meet those. And then if you're exceeding those by a lot, you might ask, is there a better way to meet those requirements at better cost?
I think Sandy pretty much summed it up. One thing I didn't cover, when we throw just a reminder, you go to the byproducts in a ration, you're going to have to make sure we have limestone, or going back to that calcium phosphorus ratio, we need to make sure we're in that. Basically, it's a 2 to 1, somewhere in that range.
Now I've taken
Because it changes.
taken out the
Go ahead.
alfalfa and gone to distillers without looking at anything else. You see our calcium and phosphorus is now, we're now meeting both the calcium and phosphorus requirement, but our ratio, and I'm over here now, here's the calcium and phosphorus requirement, and then here's the calcium to phosphorus ratio. And notice you've got that little help screen there. A value around 2 to 3 to 1 is appropriate, and so we're well under 2, and we're under 1. So we need to add calcium into this diet to feed that much distillers, or some, you know, or reduce our distillers. And when I cut that in half, it still has us at a 1-to-1 ratio. I don't know if I get my hay up high enough, why? It helps it some. Okay, and Ron's asking again about this save button, so we're gonna try that right now and see if we can find out what happens. I'm gonna I'm not gonna look at the evaluation at all, I'm just gonna create 2 different rations. Okay, here's native with 4 pounds of distillers, and I'm gonna call that 4 DDG. And I'm going to hit this save button down here. Okay, and if I go back to late gestation and hit restore, still thinking. Okay, now I'm back to 8 pounds of alfalfa. And if I go to my 4-DDG, and hit restore, okay, so the thing is I have to put my file name up here probably, but if I wanted to change this to now 4 DDGs plus, and I'm surely making this up, okay, 2 pounds of corn, I hit my save button down, that, take it back to my late gestation storage. Should take me back to 8 pounds of alfalfa. Okay, we've got our 8 pounds of alfalfa back. Now, I'll go back to my 4 DDGs and hit restore. And if we go down below here, you see that it's got those 2 pounds of corn that I added in. So I think you could hit either one, Ron. The thing would be, you know, when you haven't given it a name yet, you're probably going to hit the save button up here once you've created a name. And then as you want to use that same name, you just need to resave it. You probably can hit down here.
I think it would be safer to go to the top one, for at least for me, because that way I'm not saving over something that I don't want to save over. It's just, I think you're right, Sandy, but I couldn't find it in the manual yet, and we'll have to do some digging just to get full clarification on it, but I think Sandy's shown that it works either way. But for me, I'd like going to the top, because that way I won't save over something I might have spent 15 minutes working on.
Right, forces you to think about that file name and what you want under that file name.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any questions that we haven't touched? I tried to address everything that has been brought up to us over the past 2 weeks. I know Carl Garden had the questions on the feed library. We're going to correct those as fast as possible and get an update to you. I think the problem last time was we were in a hurry and I made some mistakes, and that's why it was screwed up, so we don't want to rush through it too fast this time, but at least we know what we're creating this time. Last time we were sort of flying in the dark, so I think we'll feel more comfortable with the finished product this time. Any questions? Sandy, I think I've covered everything on the outline. Do you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, we should just review. I don't know if Justin is going to have any assignments prior to our next get-together, and to review that get-together date.
2 weeks from today, 19th.
And Justin will work on some other examples. And since I'm not seeing anything from him, I'm going to guess that if he's got some handouts ahead of time, he'll get those to you. I will get the recording of this session, so if you talk to others and want to know about that, I'll try and get that recording link back out to everybody as soon as I can. I Yes.
Sandy, I also wanted to mention that I have are in the works of creating a listserv for everybody who has the brand software, and everything that all correspondence will be done through that. If you have questions that you want or think that the whole group will benefit from, please feel free to use that. You should have access to it once it's created, and we send out the initial emails. Other than that, back to you, I guess, unless I figure out something else I need to say.
Okay, well, I think we have covered what our intended portion was today. And again, save those questions and keep working on it. And I think that's...
Sandy, I do have one other thing. And I just got reminded because I was closing it out. Someone asked, I don't know if it was Ron or Carl Garten asked, when you close out, do you need to hit the save button? Right before you close out Excel, it'll go, do you want to save everything you've done with Brands Excel? I was always saying no, do not save at that point. Justin and I talked about it this morning, and he said they played with it at one of their trainings. And to be honest with you, we can't tell if it affects anything at all, so I don't know. To answer the question, I don't have a good answer. I don't think it affects it either way. Unless you have any input there.
I have not saved it, and I'm relying on my initial disk that I created or loaded the program with to solve any problems I have.
That's how I've been handling it. So that's all I have for today. Thanks everybody for joining in. Hopefully this is working pretty well. We'll all get better at it as we go. Sandy, thanks for putting up with all of us on this deal.
All right, well, I hope that your brand session is not like this farmer with these problems himself. Now,
I don't know who all is still on there, Sandy. Did you see that bull selection seminar that I guess, well, I sent the email out on it last week.
yeah, I sent it to Northwest Area Agents, starts at 1 o'clock, a very similar deal to this, although I don't remember if they're using an audio bridge or just talking over.
They may be, but I don't know until I sign in to see if we are or not. Because it says